Our first question comes from Robert, who suggests that the government is clutching at straws to get economic growth. He asks, does it feel like a rabbit darting around a field trying to escape a fox? And could this approach accidentally lead to a Truss 2.0 moment? George, obviously the big political news this week, the Chancellor's speech, you were there. You've called it in the New Statesman an attempt at a vibe shift. Was it just clutching at straws?
I think clutching at straws is a little too harsh, but what there's certainly been is a big pivot away from the rather gloomy, maybe excessively gloomy, that's certainly how some members of the cabinet see it, rhetoric that started in Labour's opening months in office. All of the talk of the 22 billion black hole, Keir Starmer saying things are going to get worse. Obviously, then in the budget, you saw big tax rises as well as cuts, such as the winter fuel payments. So Rachel Reeves now, no one's in any doubt what her focus is. And look, they have good reasons for caring a lot about economic growth. There is a clear link between growth and people's wages and living standards. And if you want better public services, the only way to really afford it in the long run is higher productivity. The big question now, I think, is whether it will work. And it will be some time until we get an answer to that. I think it's also influenced by the arrival of Donald Trump in the US, undoubtedly. You see him trying to sort of fire up the animal spirits of the American economy. And there's no doubt that Labour's looked across the Atlantic and thought, are there things here that we could learn from?
Rachel, one of the things that the Chancellor mentioned in her speech this week was about reviving this idea, investing in this Oxford-Cambridge corridor, or ARC, however you want to say it. But unless my memory is failing me, which it may well be. Wasn't this...
Are you having a moment of deja vu,
Well,
Hannah?
this has been around for years, right? I think it was started in 2003 by the last Labour government. Are they just recycling old ideas?
So you could say they're recycling old ideas, and that is kind of the point that many Conservatives made this week, because the Conservatives can't attack the priority of going for growth because everyone agrees that we need to go for growth. So instead they were sort of saying these are old ideas. Another way of looking at it might be that they are ready-made, off-the-shelf ideas that you can announce sort of now as the first stage, and then go think up some more ideas of other things, and that the economic situation is such that we kind of need to be getting a start on this now. So it's not either or, old ideas, new ideas. It's yes and. But you are absolutely right that the Oxford-Cambridge Silicon Valley corridor, whatever they want to call it, has been an idea for many decades. And it makes sense because you've got these like two centres of research and sort of scientific innovation, and if you've ever tried to drive between them, it takes you basically have to come down to London and go around. And that if you can sort of build that corridor and build more lab space, and you can attract more scientists, and it does make sense. It is, however, still very focused in the southeast, in the sort of orbit of London, and that being one of the headline announcements, along with the third runway at Heathrow, which has also been something we've been talking about since the last Labour government, many decades, has led to the criticism that a lot of these ideas are kind of London southeast centric. What are they doing for getting growth more regionally distributed? Where's the Manchester, Leeds innovation corridor? Where's the sort of expansion of transport in the north? And the argument for the government is, we're going to look into doing that too, but let's do the off-the-shelf ones first.
George, I mean, there's another point that Robert makes in his question, actually, which is about, he says that some of these growth announcements seem to be a bit contradictory, and that's why he's saying clutching at straws. Heathrow expansion versus commitment to net zero. I mean, Jason Cowley has written in the New Statesman this week actually saying that the overall effect seems to be one of panic. Do you think there's some truth in that? Is that fair?
I don't think they're panicked. I mean, this is a speech that they'd planned back in December, and I think there was always going to be a natural shift from the mood leading up to the budget, where they raised taxes by 40 billion, and so they had to lay the ground for that, which meant talking about the mess that the public finances were in, to now going for growth. I think they're worried. I mean, you could not be worried by the economy basically flatlining since Labour entered power. And on Heathrow and net zero, there is clear tension there. Ed Miliband publicly loyal to Rachel Reeves, privately he does oppose third runway. But they can work together on wind farms and solar farms. So there is sort of collaboration as well as tension. In some ways, though, it's healthy for governments to have a bit of tension. Some people think there hasn't been enough tension inside governments, and that's sometimes why mistakes have been made. So, some say number 10 should have vetoed, the winter fuel cuts. So this can be the key is it a kind of creative tension or is it a destructive one?
Not the only place there seems to be an apparent contradiction, though. I mean, at one point yesterday, Rachel Reeves talked about learning the lessons from Grenfell, for example, but simultaneously then talking about deregulating, cutting red tape. I mean, the lessons from Grenfell precisely that we cut red tape too much.
Well, yeah, the lesson from Grenfell is that there was a kind of culture of was it one regulation in, one or two regulations out, and that mindset led to corners being cut and things being overlooked with really horrendous, tragic outcomes. You tend to get a sort of a cycle when it comes to regulation, which is like there's too much regulation, we can't move forward on the things that we want to move forward on, we should sort of cut it, and then something terrible happens and it's no, the government should have stepped in to stop this, we need more regulation to deal with that. And that, I think governments all across the country, all across the world have that kind of tension. What I think the Rachel Reeves kind of agenda is there are some clashes, particularly with regards to environmental protections, and we can all say we like environmental protections, and then you get these bizarre stories about bat tunnels that sort of block HS2. I think it was like £300,000 per bat life saved, and
Michael Gove talks a lot about this. Is he strange environmental protections? Rare fish.
Is he pro-bat, anti-bat? And then, of course, you get the giant crested newts. And basically, if you try and build anything and you run up against rules that are, you absolutely cannot do anything that could potentially cause any environmental harm whatsoever, what you end up with is not building anything at all, which is what we've been doing, or rather not doing, for the last 20 years.
I mean, surely the point of regulation is it's a common sense one, right? If it's about protecting human life, as in fire regulations or wherever it must be, you might need more regulation. If it's something not so, I think fundamental, then we deregulate.
I think you've also got to think of it like in the aggregate, like in a regulation on its own. What is this doing? A regulation in the context of all the other regulations for a particular project. Do they, as a whole, make it impossible to build anything? And do we then also have to think about the risk of not doing that building work, whether it's like a reservoir or a power station? And that comes with risks too, as we've seen. But no, it's not. It's not easy and it's not straightforward.
I want to add to your newt that apparently there are complaints at the moment that the Hinkley nuclear power station has been delayed or will be delayed due to a fish being sucked into the cooling system. So there we go.
Radioactive fish.
Let's hope not. I've seen that film. George, I mean, there's a new head at the left-leaning think tank, the IPPR, the Institute for Public Policy Research. He's written for the New Statesman this week, saying that Reeves should be aiming for good growth, not just growth at all costs. I mean, first of all, just explain to us what he means by good growth, and do you think Reeves covered that in the speech?
Well, good growth that's sustainable, i.e. not an overinflated financial sector. Obviously, we saw that before the crash. Growth that I think is regionally balanced. And Labour's headline aim in the sort of plan for change that Keir Starmer announced in the end of the year is to have living standards rising in every region of the UK. There's some concern from northern MPs that the emphasis on Heathrow marks like
Rachel was saying,
a diversion away from levelling up. There's also some concern around the new focus on growth and less talk of living standards. So you'll remember when Labour came in, they had this pledge, we're going to achieve the highest growth in the G7. That then became a tighter focus on higher living standards because, as we've seen at times in the last 2 decades, sometimes GDP can be rising, but wages are flatlining. Some MPs worry that Labour is now emphasising GDP too much. There's this famous heckle.
Which obviously goes up if you have more people.
Yeah.
As we've said, these immigration statistics this week, or predictions.
Exactly. So there's this famous heckle that was made at the think tank director Anand Menon during the Brexit debate. It was a debate in Newcastle. And he pointed out economists forecast that if we leave the EU, GDP will fall. She riposted, that's your bloody GDP, not ours. And that is a sentiment that Morgan McSweeney in Number 10 is very aware of the dangers of. Nigel Farage has said quality of life is more important than just a few extra percent on GDP. Now, the point Rachel Reeves would make is that generally still higher GDP does mean more money in people's pockets. But I think Labour need to make that link much more clearly, or they are open to the criticism that isn't most of this growth going into other people's pockets, or isn't it just because we've got much higher net migration than we've had at other times, and so on?
Rachel, how's the opposition responded to this? I mean, how long could the Prime Minister really just keep saying, you ruin the economy? I mean, how are they kicking back?
Well, as I said at the start, it's a slightly difficult one for them because the Conservatives can't oppose the priority of let's go for growth. So instead, the messaging has very much been, what's harming growth? It's Labour's policies. It's the budget. It's the rise in employer national insurance. It's the pressures that are being put on businesses. That's the real barrier to growth. And Rachel Reeves can talk all she likes about having a growth mindset or going for growth or whatever. But look at what the government's actually doing. And at PMQs this week, the target of that line of attack was the government's employment rights bill, which is another really interesting example of where one government priority, growth, comes up against another government priority. Like we talked about net zero already, but the employment rights bill and basically giving much stronger protections to workers, things like banning 0 hours contracts and getting certain protections and rights from day one. Now, you could say, and this is what Labour is saying, that, you can be pro-business and pro-worker, and we all benefit if people feel more secure, and businesses should want their workers to feel protected and secure, and that will increase productivity, and you can make all of those arguments, and Labour is making those arguments. But what the Conservatives are saying and what Camille Badenoch was saying at PMQs is this is going to impose extra costs for businesses, particularly small businesses who are already having to pay the higher minimum wage and the increased national insurance, and it's going to cost them so much that they will stop hiring or they will go under completely. And how does that fit with your growth agenda? And she did quite a good job actually of picking out sort of key clauses and key provisions in the bill that she said could be a direct barrier to growth. I don't think it particularly landed this week, but if we start to see, George has written this week about how Labour is relaxed about the potential for higher unemployment if it means that there were more good jobs in the economy. But if we start to see job losses, if we start to see businesses not hiring or cutting jobs, you're going to get the Conservative line of, hang on, you said you wanted growth, and yet these are the policies that you have enacted that are a direct barrier to growth. And I think that could be quite a compelling message for them.